Madam Speaker, I want to start by joining with my colleague member of Parliament, the Minister who spoke earlier, in wishing a happy Teachers' Day to all the teachers across Jamaica and the world. Madam Speaker, it is said that a great teacher opens minds, inspires dreams, builds confidence, and shines a light on the path towards a greater life. And many of us here, Madam Speaker, are beneficiaries of the work of great teachers who have molded and shaped us into the successful individuals that we are today. So, Madam Speaker, let me start. Madam Speaker, I want to express my extreme appreciation to the Leader of the Opposition for his continued confidence in me as I continue to shadow the portfolio of water and agriculture. I want to also acknowledge, Madam Speaker, the constituents of Southwestern Clarendon who continue to express their support for the People's National Party and myself as their Member of Parliament. Madam Speaker, I'll start as usual by discussing some issues surrounding the constituency. The constituency, Madam Speaker, like many others in rural Jamaica, continues to face significant challenges with bad road infrastructure, a few of which, Madam Speaker, have been exacerbated by the current Maypen to Williamsfield Highway construction project. Whilst over the past year, Madam Speaker, we have seen some steps by NROC and China Harbour to remedy these problems, we are still awaiting similar repairs to other roads which are also adversely impacted by the highway construction process. These include, Madam Speaker, but are not limited to, roads like Comfort Road and Denby Drive. The residents of these communities have suffered significant distress as a result of the dust nuisance and the inconvenience of heavy equipment which have been utilizing these roads since highway construction commenced 3 years ago. Madam Speaker, there's also the issue of flooding, and I've talked about this time and time again. Madam Speaker, there is this gully, the Fleming's Gully. It is a particular area of concern for us as the gully runs right beneath the highway. And Madam Speaker, we are still saying that this gully requires urgent attention and it needs to be widening to ensure that there is sufficient drainage of water to carry it to the sea. Madam Speaker, as I said last year during the debates, and I repeat again for emphasis, the constituency welcomes the placement and development of any asset that will serve the local and the national interest. However, we do not believe, Madam Speaker, that any such development should impede the personal liberties and progress of the people who reside within the adjoining communities. It would be exceptionally unfair to the residents to be worse off at the end of the construction process than they would have been had it not commenced in the first place. Madam Speaker, I will now turn to the areas for which I have portfolio responsibility, namely agriculture and water. And as is customary, I will address both of them in turn. Madam Speaker, in my first sectoral presentation in 2021, I proposed the formulation of an import substitution strategy to slash the value of imports in half over the next 5 years. I indicated that the record value then of US $1.025 billion in 2019 was unsustainable for any country with the population size of Jamaica that is seeking to attain food security. Madam Speaker, in the said year I spoke, that is 2021, the 2019 record was broken by a 9.5% increase, moving from $1.025 billion to US $1.122 billion. Madam Speaker, just last week Friday, the Statistical Institute of Jamaica released the international merchandise trade data for the year 2022. And listen to this, Madam Speaker and members of the House. Astonishingly, the record which was set in 2021 of US $1.122 billion has been crushed by a staggering 25%. So between 2021 and 2022, we increased by 25% the value of goods imported. Listen to the figure. Jamaica's food import bill as of December 2022 was 1.402 billion Jamaican dollars. 1.4 billion Jamaican dollars, Madam Speaker. That equates to roughly 215 billion Jamaican dollars. And that is based on the value of the goods declared. We are not taking into account the additional fees and charges and the ultimate burden and cost that this will have on our consumers. So $215 billion on imports is unacceptable in 2023, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, Jamaica's total import bill last year was 7.73 billion, with our food import, Madam Speaker, accounting for 18.3% of our overall imports. That is totally unacceptable. Madam Speaker, and the minister needs to understand that in a country where rural communities are largely dependent on agriculture, which, as he pointed out in his presentation, accounts for 250,000 registered farmers and fishers, imports require a cauterization strategy immediately, Madam Speaker. We need a new direction. Madam Speaker, time and time again, we return to the Parliament, contribute to the debates as opposition spokespersons, highlighting issues, outlining solutions, some short-term, some long-term. And each year, when we look at the statistics, it is apparent, Madam Speaker, that things are changing for the worse instead of the betterment of the country, instead of increasing agricultural output and decreasing the sizable imports of agricultural products, which, as mentioned earlier, is now at a whopping 215 billion Jamaican dollars cost to the Jamaican people. We have noted a significant movement in the imports year over year, and this movement has been in the wrong direction. Will we ever be able to get agriculture right, Madam Speaker? That is the question. Indeed, Madam Speaker, it begs the question, does the ministry have an understanding of what is required to reduce the food import bill? Is it able to firmly implement strategies to reduce the bill and increase output in the local sector? What is clear to us as an opposition, Madam Speaker, is that if we analyze the poor management, for example, of subsectors such as the dairy sector, and the inability to understand what presently inhibits the local production of red kidney beans, for example, and those will be highlighted later on in the presentation. It is clear that the ministry does not know what they are doing. Madam Speaker, CARICOM has launched a 25 in 5 agenda to reduce the region's food import bill by 25% in the next 5 years. But Jamaica does not appear to have been included in this undertaking. If it has been included, if Jamaica has been included, then the minister needs to tell the public what, if any, of these strategies he has supported or adopted as the current trajectory that we are seeing, based on the evidence of 2022's import performance, is most concerning. Madam Speaker, I want to turn to and look at two of what is considered to be the ministry's flagship programs. Let us look at Irish potato and onions. Irish potato and onions, Madam Speaker, were selected by successive administrations as ideal crops for an import substitution strategy. Because at the time, the import component of total consumption was high in both. as much as 90% of our consumption of onions and as much as 70% of our consumption of Irish potatoes were being imported. Madam Speaker, it was critical that the government of the day carefully crafted the operational aspects of the program to ensure that once we increased local output, imports would not be affected by local sales. The methodology employed, Madam Speaker, was to ascertain the annual and monthly consumption needs, crop availabilities, were then sourced through RADA's extension network, and this allowed the earlier administration, that is PNP administration, Madam Speaker, to only import the amounts required, if any, to close the gap. The methodology, Madam Speaker, allowed the government, the PNP administration at the time, to attain a 90% self-sufficiency in Irish potato consumption by 2014. 90% self-sufficiency. The other important element in the methodology, Madam Speaker, was the timely release of import permits once a shortfall was forecasted. The latter element in the methodology was crafted to protect the consumer because it was felt that tightening supplies would give the program a negative national image once prices rose. However, once local supplies were available, import permits would not be released as was done by the government in March of this year. Kindly recall, Madam Speaker and members of the House, earlier this year in March, the farmers in Landui, St. Thomas, the pain that was etched on their faces as they lamented on national television the displacement of their onion markets by imports. Madam Speaker, when I called for the cessation of import permits, for the release of onions, Madam Speaker, the ministry's terse response was that the statement related to the importation of onion was incorrect and it was divisive, and that they had not facilitated the release of onion imports. Now listen to this, Madam Speaker, because I did some research and I have in my possession, Madam Speaker, an arrival notice dated the 6th of March 2023 this year. Oh, gosh. Speaking to the arrival of the vessel, Cape Corfu, I'll give the details, registered under the flag of Cyprus and signifying the arrival of several containers of Dutch yellow onions. Who imported it? Well, the ministry can answer that question. The minister owes the farmers an apology, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, if the minister so wishes, I can share with him that arrival notice. And if he wishes to respond to that, then so be it. But it is an arrival notice that came in, a ship came in, Cape Corfu, under the Dutch, under the flag of Cyprus, and that ship carried onions to Jamaica. Let us be clear, Madam Speaker. We want the programs to succeed. However, they need to be better managed in the interest of the consumers of this country and our hard-working farmers. How can we grant permits for onions when our local farmers have indicated and have proven that they can sustain the market? Who benefits from the imports of onions, Madam Speaker? Certainly not the farmers, and certainly not our local consumers. The farmer, Madam Speaker, are being told to grow onions, could not find a market, and the latter having to fork out more money for the purchase of imported onions. And what is more concerning is we are encouraging the farmers to farm onions, and we don't have proper facilities to help them to dry the onions, to allow them to be able to have those onions remain on the market for the 6 to 8 months shelf life which dried onions permit. So these are the things that are lacking, and these are the issues that the Ministry of Agriculture need to address. You can't be having farmers in St. Thomas farming onions and you don't have a proper drying facility in St. Thomas. you're hunting down spaces in Clarendon to bring their onions to dry them. That doesn't make any sense. Madam Speaker, let us look now at red kidney beans, Madam Speaker. While being pleased to hear the ministers encouraging the farmers to invest in the cultivation of legumes, and in particular red kidney beans, I was disappointed by his failure to articulate the problematic issues which affect the production of this legume, and more concerned that the solution pathways to the problems were not offered. Madam Speaker, one of the obstacles that the minister must face, the first obstacles, is the anomaly in the duty structure, which forces Jamaica Customs to apply a prohibitive and punitive duty of 90% on red kidney beans seeds, the seeds for planting, once they generate from extra-regional sources. So our farmers start out in the red because they have to be paying 90% just for the planting material. And that is something that we can fix easily. This anomaly was not only highlighted by me in my previous presentation, Madam Speaker, but by several stakeholders and, importantly, input providers. Yet to date, no corrective action has been taken. The end result is a simple connection between the ministry and the Ministry of Finance, and that can be resolved immediately. And I'm going to show you how beneficial this could be to the country. The end result, Madam Speaker, is an overpriced imported red kidney bean seed for planting, which naturally limits the farmer's ability to be expansive in his sowing and ultimately result in sustained output. Madam Speaker, while we are shooting ourselves in the foot, our neighbors Belize are exporting to us at least 90% of the light red kidney beans that we consume. If Belize can do this, Madam Speaker, then why not Jamaica? Madam Speaker, for culinary purposes, our red kidney beans and small red bean are used interchangeably in our red bean meal preparations. Every cook shop, every single day, use red beans. Every cook shop, either in red pea soup, stew peas, ital stew, etc. Together, they both contribute approximately $9 million to our food import bill. In 2021, Madam Speaker, a value of $9.3 million which is 1.5 billion Jamaican dollars, of red beans was imported into Jamaica with an associated weight of 7.4 kilograms. Of grave 7.4 million kilograms, correction. Of grave interest to our farmers is that given our productivity rate, which is 1,167 kilograms per hectare, the imported weight in 2021 of 7,407,726 kilograms translates to a wasted opportunity to cultivate 6,348 hectares or 15,686 acres of idle land. And we have a lot of idle land, Madam Speaker, in Clarendon, in St. Thomas, in Trelawney, in St. Catherine. Idle lands that once were under cultivation with cane. And we are wasting the opportunity to actually put these lands under production immediately and earn and save the country $1.5 billion in imports on a yearly basis. Madam Speaker, let us also look at the dairy industry as a subsector. The admonishing by the Ministry of Agriculture for Jamaicans to consume smartly can be nowhere better represented than in the consumption of milk. The Food and Agricultural Organization of the United States, Madam Speaker, highly recommends that we maintain a healthy diet to support the optimal functioning of our immune system. It then advises that a review of the majority of countries who report to the FAO Dietary Guidelines database indicated that the milk consumption absolutely essential to maintaining a healthy diet, contributing to optimal functions of our immune system. Madam Speaker, if the minister's grow smart, eat smart mantra is to be seen as practical and not just another hollow sound bite, we must swiftly provide the necessary policies resources, and technically competent oversight to correct the inadequacies that now affect the administration of the dairy industry. Madam Speaker, in 1992, Jamaica produced approximately 39 million litres of liquid milk. Presently, Madam Speaker, output has not passed 14 million litres in the last 5 years, and that figure was produced only in 2018, standing at 14.2 million litres. The other years were consistently 11 million litres and 13 million litres. Of significant note, Madam Speaker, is that the 11.8 million litres produced in 2021 shows that we are regressing and not progressing as we ought to. These poultry production numbers bear testimony to the fact that there is significant mismanagement of the sector, and the Jamaica Dairy Development Board must be tasked with providing answers on the reasons for the regression and failures mentioned above, especially when you consider, Madam Speaker, what we see is a growth in the value of imports of skimmed and whole milk powder. Yes. Madam Speaker, the value of both skimmed and whole milk powder moved from US 9.3 million in 2020 to US 11.724 million in 2021, a significant increase of 25%, amounting to roughly 1.8 billion Jamaican dollars. Madam Speaker, if you look at the quantities of both skim milk and whole milk powders imported, and also the purpose for which they are imported, we get a deeper insight into the inadequate oversight that is offered by the Ministry of Agriculture to this subsector. In 2020, the imported quantity of both powders was 3,500,000 kilograms, and in 2021, 3,843,000 kilograms. Reconstituted, Madam Speaker, that amounts to 35 million litres. And when it's reconstituted, what they do is take the powder, turn it back into milk to use it into the production process. When we analyze the purposes for which these powders are brought in, Madam Speaker, they are brought in to produce yogurt, ice cream, baked products, chocolate, etc. The elementary solution and the obvious solution to us as a country, Madam Speaker, is to bring the local manufacturers to the discussion table and start the dialogue to substitute the imported powder with locally produced fresh milk. We cannot continue on this expensive import path. The value of imports was just $5 million in 2017, rising to US $11 million in 2021, a 98% increase over a 4-year period. This, Madam Speaker, will not achieve the Vision 2030 plan to develop the livestock subsector, nor will it help to achieve the fundamental aim of the National Food and Nutrition Security Policy to eliminate malnutrition and other health-related problems plaguing our society. We're now going to look at another subsector, Madam Speaker, to show how the Ministry of Agriculture is failing our farmers. Let us look at mango. Mango. Madam Speaker, in 2019, Jamaica began its re-export of mangoes to the USA. With great fanfare at an official ceremony at the Sangster International Airport Complex in Montego Bay, St. James. We thought, Madam Speaker, that all the protocols for an effective re-entry into the USA had been re-established. This renewed export of mangoes to the USA, Madam Speaker, was an initiative that had been worked on by the PNP administration. And finally, in 2014, the United Nations Department of Agriculture gave Jamaica clearance to export mangoes to their country. The USDA, however, was very careful to insist on a program of crop management that would reduce the tolerable levels of the infestation of fruit flies. Madam Speaker, therefore came as a shock, and listen to us when we heard that the export of mangoes to the USA was stopped, was curtailed because of a heavy infestation of fruit fly larvae in the sampling of mangoes for export. It is remarkably disappointing, Madam Speaker, because the protocols are known. They were known. The ministerial officials have communicated these essential elements for a successful relaunch of mangoes into the USA. And yet, the present administration, through a lack of foresight, has failed our mango farmers. Madam Speaker, while this is happening, the ministry is proudly advertising through its investment arm, AgroInvest, what they consider to be an excellent mango agro-park opportunity in Tollgate, Clarendon. Madam Speaker, the minister has indicated that a hot water treatment facility, which is an alternative treatment to ionizing radiation for control of the infestation of fruit fly, is not seen as an investment opportunity by private investors. Madam Speaker, I agree with the minister. He's quite right in this observation. However, he needs to use the numbers to understand why, so that a timely decision on an effective treatment can be decided on. The truth, Madam Speaker, is that the throughput of mangoes exported is insignificant to make an investment outlay of hot water treatment facility worthwhile. And private investors, rightfully, would have sourced these figures, and having looked at the figures, they would have realized and recognized that it is not feasible. The annual export of mangoes in 2019, 2020, and 2021, respectively, were 353,000, 288,000, and 746,000 kilograms. I offer, Madam Speaker, my recommendation. As usual, I'm always here to offer recommendations and provide solutions. I suggest that the ministry should establish the hot water treatment facility at its export complexes as an inducement to investors who want to grow and export mangoes. The cost of the equipment and maintenance of the facility can be recovered from fees charged for services offered. Madam Speaker, what I was saying was that we could establish these hot water treatment facilities at the points of export. And we could recover the fees, Madam Speaker, recover the charge, by charging fees, we could recover the cost for the equipment and maintenance of the facility. And this is no different, Madam Speaker, from what we do with yams. So it is something that we have done before, and it's something that we can continue to do, and we can do for mango, because mango has tremendous potential for this country. Madam Speaker, let us examine exports. Madam Speaker, while our food exports grew by 1.88%, a very marginal 1.88% in 2022, moving from US $268 million in 2021 to US $273 million in 2022, there are concerns which must be addressed. In 2022, Madam Speaker, the ratio between imports and exports rose to 5-to-1. That is, while we spend $5 on imports, we only earn $1 from exports. This widening gap in the ratio between imports and exports, Madam Speaker, has not been seen for over a dozen years, 2011 to 2022. And it is of dire concern, Madam Speaker. Over these 12 years research, Madam Speaker, the range had a low of 3.6-to-1 recorded in 2012 and a high of 4.7-to-1 in 2019. Madam Speaker, if we are not careful, we will run a risk of a deepening negative balance of visible trade. Let us put it into perspective how threatening the underperformance in both the export and import activities in the food category can be to the economy. Madam Speaker, Jamaica's trade deficit in 2022 was negative $5.829 billion, the highest recorded over the last 5 years researched. In that same year, the ratio between food imports and food exports recorded the highest differential over the last 12 years, as I said earlier. Interestingly, Madam Speaker, listen to this. The record food import value of US $1.4 billion last year was equivalent to our total exports, that is all categories, within the export value leaving Jamaica in 2021. So in 2021, overall, we exported $1.4 billion worth of goods. That includes bauxite, that includes alumina, that includes limestone, that includes many other things. And the food import category, The food import bill for 2022 wiped out every single gain that we made from our overall exports. That is alarming, Madam Speaker. I need the minister to not get carried away with the marginal 1.83% growth in the value of food exports because of some worrying signs that we have detected. Yams, Madam Speaker, yams recorded a decrease for the first time in over 12 years, falling from US 36 million in 2021 to US 34 million in 2022, a decrease of 4.1%. I never dreamed that I'd ever see a day when we had a decrease in the imports of yam in any given year. This was alarming when I saw it, because the trajectory has always been that yam is always increasing. And this has dire and ripple effects for many constituencies and many parishes. And this is something we need to investigate urgently to find out what is happening in that sector to ensure that we can curtail any further losses. Madam Speaker, there were other reductions which are very concerning as well. We had, for example, other root crops decreasing by minus 4.6%. Papaya, minus 6.6%. Herbs and spices, 8.2%. Animal and fish, negative 40.4%. So we're not taking full advantage of our blue economy, obviously. Madam Speaker, the minister needs to have his technical team carefully analyze those figures to determine the causal factors, because a delay today can lead to irreversible reductions and monumental losses for future generations to come. Madam Speaker, let us look at the water portfolio. The United Nations, the water, Madam Speaker, is a finite resource. The United Nations projects that the world's population will grow to 8.1 billion in 2025, with most of its growth taking place in developing countries such as Jamaica. According to the data coming out of the United Nations, water use has been growing globally at more than twice the rate of population increases in the last century. It is imperative, therefore, Madam Speaker, that as a country we preserve what we have. Here in Jamaica, the National Water Commission is responsible for more than 90% of all domestic water produced. This is made possible through a network of over 160 underground wells, over 116 river sources via water treatment plants, and over 147 springs. We are blessed with an abundance of water resources, yet every year we face drought-like conditions. Unfortunately, Madam Speaker, during periods of drought, we are confronted with severe water shortages, resulting in almost half of our population facing restrictions that, in our opinion, could be avoided with proper planning and mitigation. The reality, Madam Speaker, is that our greatest challenge still remains the need to improve our storage capacity, especially in the corporate area, where, Madam Speaker, we continue to rely on two sources for domestic water delivery, that is the Mona and the Hermitage Dam. Both dams, Madam Speaker, were designed decades ago and have both outlived their usefulness. What is even more concerning in relation to both dams is their inability to store at full capacity due to the failures of the National Water Commission in carrying out the necessary desilting that is required to ensure that there is no obstruction and therefore allow for increased storage capacity. We must also concede, Madam Speaker, that whilst desilting is needed as a matter of urgency, it is not a panacea. It is therefore imperative that we consider other alternatives, such as the expansion of these dams, beginning with the Hermitage facility. The reality, Madam Speaker, is that as we are here today, there are several thousand households across Jamaica that are without water. This, Madam Speaker, is unacceptable in 2023. Moreover, in 2023, Madam Speaker, in the rural areas, persons should not suffer the indignity of waiting in long lines at standpipes or water shops with a view to having their most basic needs met. In this day and age, all communities across Jamaica should have water delivered to their homes through pipes, And that will be the objective of the next PNP administration when we form office. We have taken keen note of the proposed Mahogany Vale Dam in St. Thomas. It is to be noted, Madam Speaker, that this proposal is not a new one, as it was first established in a 1967 report as a possible solution to augmenting the potable water supply for Kingston. It was abandoned in the 1970s for the less capital-intensive but lower-yielding Rio Cobra water system. Madam Speaker, whilst the establishment of the Mahogany Vale Dam is welcomed by us, this proposal should not be a project primarily geared towards rural development, and this is why I say so. Particularly, Madam Speaker, if you look at the eastern parishes, this is within the context of the highway construction taking place in St. Thomas and Portland, where it is anticipated that there will be a proliferation in housing and other developments in these parishes, which will see an increased demand for water in the eastern end of the island, with all the water from that dam more than likely remaining in those parishes. It is clear, therefore, Madam Speaker, that we have to look elsewhere if we are to solve the water supply issues in the Kingston metropolitan area. We may have to consider the establishment of a third dam, or possibly we have to revisit the proposed South St. Catherine Reservoir, which was proposed at the time to be 5 times the size of the Mosna Dam. This proposal, Madam Speaker, was devised in the 1980s by Joseph Adler, a civil engineer from Israel, and his local professional counterpart, Stanley Rampier. The South St. Catherine Reservoir would have had a capacity of 32 million cubic meters and be able to store up to 60 million cubic meters of water annually. The source of the water for the reservoir would have come from the Rio Cobra, assessed at the time to have been 176 million cubic meters of water on an average year, most of which was being lost to the sea and is still being lost to the sea. This proposed reservoir is more important today than it was 30 years ago, as we have seen the rocket-like trajectory in the development of St. Catherine, Portmore, and the surrounding communities. And we are now faced with the proposed development of the Bernard Lodge as a modern city. Madam Speaker, time come for us to free ourselves from many of the preventable and recurrent effects that accompany our dry seasons. We have been told by experts both locally and internationally that Jamaica possesses enough water to meet and exceed its domestic consumption needs. Why then do we need to continue to be starved of the precious resources in the land of wood and water? The Water Resources Authority, in its Water Resources Master Plan, has identified exactly where there are water resources available for development. The island has been divided, Madam Speaker, into 10 hydrologic basins, and a thorough evaluation has been conducted of all the water available in those basins across the island. The major issue which we are confronted with, Madam Speaker, is a very high demand but less resources on the south coast, whilst there is very low demand but a greater resource on the north coast. Our greatest challenge, therefore, Madam Speaker, is how to get the surplus water on the north coast to the areas with greater demand on the south coast. Madam Speaker, the question, therefore, is, what has become of our water resource master plan? How far along are we with its implementation? Do we really need more studies to tell us what to do? I don't think so, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, as an opposition, we are deeply concerned about the proposed private-public partnership arrangement between the National Water Commission and any private investor, based on the fact that water is an essential part of our daily lives, and our consumers should never be left to the mercy of the private sector. It is no secret, Madam Speaker, that this government has signed off to establish a 15 million gallons per day water treatment plant along the Rio Cobra to augment the water supply for the Kingston metropolitan area. The private investor will be required to design, build, finance, operate, and maintain the plant under a 25-year concession agreement. Our greatest concern, Madam Speaker, is that this arrangement was not put to public tender and seems to have been resulted from a private closed-door conversation between the National Water Commission and members of the private sector. In fact, to date, we are yet to be told which private sector entity was awarded such a contract to privatize a portion of our critical water resource. This approach is unacceptable, Madam Speaker, and should be immediately investigated to determine if the country will get value for money from this arrangement. Our checks have revealed, Madam Speaker, that the beneficiary of this deal, Rio Cobra Water Limited, is a company that was incorporated on the 25th of October 2021, less than 2 years ago, right? And they have been issued, right? And they are proposing to raise 9.78 billion from the local markets. We find it very curious that a private company with little to no history or background in water treatment and delivery services could be handpicked for such an important project. We also find it curious that the government would embark on such an arrangement at this time when projects such as the Montego Bay Perimeter Project, the North-South Highway Improvement Projects are being financed from the government coffers. So why don't you finance such an important project as well from the government coffers? This therefore begs the question, is this a first step in what is being rumored as the proposed privatization of our water resources? We would hope not, Madam Speaker. We are calling on this government to rethink its approach to this proposed project, and in the interest of accountability and transparency, and to ensure that Jamaicans get value for money, there should be consultation with the people of Jamaica prior to us heading down this very slippery slope. Madam Speaker, the time for action, in closing, the time for action is quickly slipping away. We need to better protect our agriculture and water resources. We need to stop pussyfooting around and start putting plan to action. It is clear that what is required is a new direction, a direction which focuses on local growth and decreased importation while simultaneously increasing our exportation. A new direction which focuses on reducing the need to experience extensive drought-like conditions while ensuring that all Jamaicans are included in the decision-making process while ultimately determining their standard of living. A new direction which requires accountability from those who proffer the mantra that Jamaicans should grow smart and eat smart, which actually requires them to do so instead of using empty words on a PR slogan. A new direction where Jamaica can actually grow and eat smart as opposed to being sold and imported food, which is being sold to them as locally grown food. This administration, despite numerous opportunities, have proven itself to be incapable, Madam Speaker, of providing the solutions which are required to grow Jamaica and move Jamaica in the right direction. Madam Speaker, time come. I thank you, Madam Speaker. God bless Jamaica.